Well, that's all right. Hey, listen, welcome to Lunch with Lincoln. It is noon in the East. It is 9 a.m. in the West. My name is Reed Galen, co-founder of the Lincoln Project and your host for today. I am flattered, humbled, and honored to have Sid Davidoff on the show with me today. Sid was one of the original 20 members of Richard Nixon's enemies list back in 1972. And we asked Mr. Davidoff to come on with us today because what we're seeing us personally here at the Lincoln Project and with these January 6th hearings is just how far and how willing the Trump administration was willing and might be willing again to go to punish those that take it on in a public fashion. And so, Sid, I want to welcome you to the show today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, Sid, take us back. So you and I were talking before the show started. So you worked for Mayor John Lindsay of New York. He was a Republican in 1968, was considered on the short list for Nixon's VP. Obviously, then went to Spiro Agnew, who subsequently had to leave for tax evasion purposes. Mayor Lindsay switches parties and runs in a few primaries in 1972 as a Democrat. And suddenly you pop up on Nixon's enemies list. So take us, first and foremost, how you got there and then how it really affected you.
Right. So, I was with John Lindsay. John Lindsay started running for Congress in 1958 for the first time and won against an incumbent in the Republican Party. I was a young, aggressive person who loved John. Stayed with him, and when he ran for mayor in 1965, I handled his advance and field operation. When we got into City Hall, my title was administrative assistant to the mayor, but my job was really the political person. I dealt with the patronage. I dealt with the organization that we set up. We had built an incredible volunteer organization out in the streets, and that's how we won in the city of New York on a Republican liberal line. So you had a mayor who was probably one of the most best known figures in the United States at the time. Right. He invented, a political television in the sense that he would go on, the Tonight Show and so on. And he was just great. He looked the part. He was central casting. And so as a national figure and a true leader of a major urban city in the world, he had a lot to say. In 1968, as you said, he was on the short list for vice president. At that time, Senator Jake Javits was Republican senator from New York, senior senator, and he pushed very hard. And eventually, Dick Nixon decided to go with Spiro Agnew. But the Republican Party at the time was changing. You had Goldwater, 64. The fight, Rockefeller, who later became vice president under Ford, was constantly at odds. He was governor of the state of New York, constantly at odds with John Lindsay, the mayor, which is pretty natural in New York. The mayor and the governor do not get along necessarily. And as time went on, John Lindsay felt that he had no place in the Republican Party or what it was becoming, and he switched to the Democratic Party and ran into a number of primaries in Florida, Iowa, Massachusetts, Wisconsin, and it finally pulled out of the race. So that's the history of the mayor. I have to believe that he was a true enemy of what Dick Nixon believed he was a true enemy and could hurt him in the general election, whether he was going to be the nominee or whether he would be effective on the campaign trail for the Democratic opponent. My guess is, though no one ever told me, but from the description that they had of me on that list, that I was the head of his youth movement. I was his political arm. They call me a bag man, a few other things. And I think that they felt that destroying me, taking me down, because you couldn't get to him. I mean, this was a white knight in a lot of ways. Tremendous reputation, honesty, and so on. So they figured they can get to me, this kid from Queens, it would be a lot easier. Take me down, they take the organization down, they take him down with it. So that's my guess is how I made that list. And I got to tell you, I was already out of the administration. I was in the restaurant business, and a very well-known restaurant, Jimmy's, at that time in New York, with a lot of political people, a very busy bar and all. And when it came, we had the televisions on at the bar, and when it came over, and John Dean announced the enemies list, and and then mentioned my name, the place went wild. I was inside. I don't know what I was doing, but all of a sudden I get this scream. I thought, what happened to my bar? I went in there, and they said, "Here you are on television." And next thing I know, the lights of my phones are lighting up. In those days, you had those phones with a whole bunch of extensions, and
Sure.
And everything went from there. That was my notice that there was such a list, and then I was on it, and I'm proud to become an enemy of the state at the time.
So Sid, but before, I want to get back to that moment for a second, but just looking over this enemies list, it was, the likes of Paul Newman, right? One of the, would have been at the top of his game acting wise, right?
Yeah.
And fame wise back then. A lot of Hollywood folks, a lot of people who've been dedicated to what, then would have been liberal causes, a lot of labor leaders, right? So here you are with the likes of Paul Newman and the head of the UAW, right? And you're sitting there, and suddenly John Dean, who's sitting before I suppose it was, select committee on Watergate, and they mention your name. Like, after the sort of the noise and the hue and the fray of the bar, as your name is mentioned, what's the feeling like that?
Well, my initial feeling is disbelief. How do I make, how do I make more of this? I mean, I was proud to be on that list, and I'm still proud to have been on the list. It's at a time when they clearly were exposing Nixon for who he was, and if you can imagine, it was I was not unused to being in the press. It was controversial in a lot of different ways. I had a very well-known restaurant, so I understood the public relations value of it. But to think, it reminds me of my mother, who at the time was, in Florida in her late 70s, called me up and said, "All my friends are talking to you. What did you do wrong?" And so it was. There were many mixed reactions going through me, and finally, when I settled down and with the crazy, as you can imagine, the number of press calls and magazines and so on, when I settled in, we had at my restaurant, we had the enemies ball, where a number of the people on the list came to. It was a lot of fun, and then reality set in,
right?
Because then the weight of the government, and I realized the interference in my life was starting to happen, because it didn't happen.
Because Sid, I just want to interrupt, because this happens in 68, or you're on this enemies list starting in 68, right? You don't know about it. Doesn't come out until later, but Nixon takes office in 65, doesn't leave till 74.
Yeah, right.
So take us through.
He takes office in 68.
Mm-hmm.
And not 65. You said 65. Yeah. I don't know when the enemies list exactly was made, obviously, but it was, I think, geared to the 72 campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look back after that, and I started to realize I didn't have my problem with the IRS until later.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously the wheels had started, because I was seeing a young lady at the time who had a doorman, and I went to see, I went to see her one evening, and the doorman said to me, there's somebody here who has flashed a badge, who started asking some questions about you and what you do and coming and going, what you drive, what do I ever bring presents? It was crazy kind of. I said, I couldn't imagine what he was talking about. Then I had clients who would tell me that, once I knew the IRS was involved, they would call my clients and say, "Do you pay him in cash? Do you pay him differently than his law firm?" There was, questions that were crazy. And then, but again, what started, it seemed to be as somewhat invasive, in that they would go to the doorman, among other things, of the woman I was seeing. And then when the IRS finally sent the audit letter, it was already beyond that time, and it just didn't stop. It was very aggressive. It was years of fighting. At the end of it all, there was I paid nothing other than the legal and the accounting fees, which were horrendous. But I think it's like now when you say we have two major figures in this country being audited by the IRS somehow, coincidentally, if you believe in coincidences, and it happened after he's out for a year. Trump is out for a year. So once the mechanics of the government gets going, it doesn't stop unless, I guess it can be stopped, but unless somebody would have had to do that. But it's already in the pipeline, and it's going to be with you for years after that.
And so from the time that you talk about this with your trouble with the IRS and them, clearly it appears following you around at some level, right? Because they wouldn't have just found out you were going to this young lady's building by accident.
Yeah.
When did you finally come out of it? How long did it actually take for you?
The IRS part had to be over 20 years. There were liens, unfounded liens that they placed. We fought them. And finally, I would say, about 25 years after it started, I received a letter from the IRS saying that we're sorry for the inconvenience. Basically, everything's being removed. We've closed the case. So
that would have been in the 1990s?
Absolutely.
My God.
When it started, I mean, I was mostly a government employee. I mean, unless you were thinking I was taking bribes and hiding the money, and I suppose that's conceivable, and that's what they say. It was a bagman for Lindsay in the description. I suppose it's conceivable that that's what they thought. But other than my salary, there wasn't anything there. I mean, I was living on what somebody makes for working for the government, and I had a government car, so it wasn't and I shared residency with 3 other people in the mayor's office. So it wasn't like I was living a high life. But
right.
They went, it just continued because they believed for some reason that there was a lot more there than I was showing.
And so now let's fast forward to what you're seeing today. As I mentioned to you before we came on air, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you is because, as I noted, and for the folks who haven't heard this, a couple of weeks ago, we found out through an unrelated Freedom of Information Act request that that Mark Meadows, chief of staff to Donald Trump, sent an opposition research memorandum on the Lincoln Project to Bill Barr on November 11th, 2020, just 8 days after Election Day in 2020. And so, and then, Sid, we saw, I assume that there'd been some conversation between Meadows and Barr or somebody there about what they wanted to do with this information. And then we saw, somewhere in the Trump orbit, political operation came after us, in rare fashion, very hard, tried to embarrass us, tried to embarrass our families, made all these crazy accusations, false accusations against us. And we have to assume that, to your point, like you were one of 20, that there are other people, in these sorts of crosshairs. Now we see it, in these January 6th hearings where it's not even necessarily governmental entities, but people, who are following someone like Donald Trump, his orders, and are harassing people, their sick kids. Every Saturday, these people come out. So, what's your sense of how you're seeing this, given the context of what you've lived through?
Having been in the government, though with city government, but still with a lot of power of a lot of people.
Well, it's New York City. It's not exactly
City,
a small place.
When I was there, you realize, you got a 33,000 man police force, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of power you have in your hands. This is the city of New York. Imagine the most powerful man in the country says to the people who work for him, I want a piece of them, when in whatever fashion he puts it in. I understand negative research. We did it in every campaign I've ever been involved in, and I've been involved in a lot of campaigns. But we're talking about the weight of the government coming down on you, the ability, the bully pulpit that you have to deal with in the press, and then on the side where in the shadows where no one sees it. It's that I gained a lot of respect after that as to what the government can do and what they should be able to do. And the fact that two people like Comey and McCabe can be coincidentally audited within a year or two of each other, the odds are I got a better chance of winning the lottery. And they have to be nervous because it is this behemoth of a government that has arms beyond what you can imagine who can interfere with your life. So this is not something that can be toyed with. And the fact that somebody would do it at the presidential level is very, very scary.
Sid, you said something after John Dean announced your name as part of the enemies list, that you took it as a badge of honor, and you weren't going to quit. I think it would have been, well within anybody's normal perspective to say, you know what, like I got this close, I almost got burned badly. Actually, you did have to deal with it for, as you said, almost 25 years. But what in that moment made you decide to, I don't want to say stay in the fight, but not shrink from it?
It's in my makeup. Just like somehow you grow up that way. Look, I been in a lot of fights, a lot of controversial issues. I'm an attorney. We're dealing with controversy all the time. I've been a figure in New York politics for so many years. It's you can't let it get to you. I expressed how scary it is, and I don't think that, particularly when I was younger, how scared I was once I understood the impact of this thing. That my life going forward I could never make a dollar, perhaps, if the IRS really could find something on me, and so it's just worth the fight. You can't give it up. This is that we can't walk away from a government that wants to take you down. It's impossible.
Is what you're seeing based on the Trump administration, is any of this surprising to you?
I represented Donald on some of his projects here in New York before. He surprises me in a lot of things he's done. But this, Donald Trump, but this doesn't surprise me that he would do this. His wielding of power he is a person that will take it to the ultimate. He never will admit a loss, and he will try to destroy his quote enemies. So it doesn't surprise me. It surprised me that he's in the position to do it, but it doesn't surprise me that he's done it once he's in the position, if that makes sense to you.
It absolutely does. So as just a slight detour here. So you did work for the guy. What was your sense of him back then? Does it comport with what the world sees today?
No, he was a great showman. He was doing a couple of projects in New York, and he did them well. New Yorkers know the Walnut Rink in Central Park and so on. He was a great source in the press. He's a great quote page 6, gossip. He was the king of the showman in a town that's the king of showmen in terms of New York. So he was a larger than life figure, and I enjoyed working for him, except that he doesn't like to pay, and that's another story. But I finally got paid. But it was knowing him, seeing him on town, I considered him, a friend. My wife, who was a columnist, journalist, Linda Stacy, who wrote about him on many, many occasions, who was there when Marla Maples gave birth. She's the only journalist allowed in to actually take a picture with him. So we were close enough. And as I say, you expected that he would do anything necessary and everything necessary to win. Question is, when you're in that kind of power, can you be that way?
Well, that's the old saying, right? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. and certainly Trump never shied away from whatever he could, and he clearly tried to hold on as long as he could until even he realized that it was a lost cause. Well, listen, Sid, I want to thank you for joining me today and sharing your story about being on an enemies list. And gang, I think that it's important to know that individual Americans, they get caught up in this stuff for doing what they believe is right. Sometimes for just doing their jobs, like we saw a couple of weeks ago with the two women from Georgia, right, who were just trying to do their jobs. And remember that when this net starts dragging, a lot of people get caught up in it, and most of them are just doing what they think is the right thing. Ed, once again, thanks again. And guys, we're going to send you off with a spot. So Felicia, let's do that. And everybody, we'll see you next week.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you all.
You have this kind of heat over major populations, you get a big draw on that electric demand, and it looks like we may have just switched over to generator power. Our lights just went out.
Texas is at risk for summer blackouts.
So I'm extremely confident that the power grid is stable.
Of course, the hotter it is, the more people turn on their air conditioning. That raises the risk for an energy emergency.
We're all being urged to turn up the thermostat, conserve energy today, or risk rolling blackouts.
After several generators failed, the state asked people to turn their thermostats up to 78 degrees.
I know, it sounds hot, but it is really cooler than it is outside.
No, I haven't had that happen since President Carter was in office. To run a grid, run the price up, and provide less service.
We will be able to make it through the summer.
Experts say despite limited outages today, this extreme heat is just the beginning of what we're going to see this summer.
This is not politics. We're trying to maintain the power supply for Texans who rely on it.
No Texan has lost power as a result of any problem with ERCOT.
We're expecting high temperatures tomorrow west of Houston to get back above 100. It did it again.